The room was quiet except for the sound of a pen moving across paper. A man sat at a desk near a window, writing. He had been writing since before dawn. His wife stood beside him, picking up each finished page, pressing a consular seal into the paper, setting it aside. Outside the window, past the gate, there was a crowd. It had been there for days. It was larger now than it had been the day before. People were still arriving. Chiune Sugihara had already written more visas that morning than most diplomats produced in a month. And Tokyo had told him to stop. He kept writing. He was 40 years old, a career diplomat who had spent his entire adult life following orders, respecting protocol, doing things the correct way. And he had just made a decision that would define the rest of it. This is his story. Chiune Sugihara was born on January 1st, 1900, in Yaotsu, in Gifu Prefecture, Japan. His father was a civil servant. His family was modest, orderly, unremarkable in the best possible sense. He was from early on the kind of person institutions are built to reward. Careful, disciplined, precise, and gifted with languages in a way that set him apart. In 1919, he passed the competitive entrance examination for Japan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It was not an easy examination. He passed it young. Over the following 2 decades, he built a career that moved through Harbin, Helsinki, and Berlin. He learned Russian, then German, then French. His superiors described him in consistent terms: meticulous, loyal, reliable, a man who followed the rules because he understood why the rules existed. In 1939, he was posted to Kaunas, Lithuania, as vice consul. His official assignment was intelligence, monitoring Soviet and German troop movements along the borders of a small country caught between 2 expanding empires. It was not, on paper, a complicated posting. Lithuania was independent, quiet, and strategically situated. He arrived with his wife Yukiko and their children and settled into the work. Then the world outside the window began to change faster than anyone had predicted. In September 1939, Germany invaded Poland from the west. The Soviet Union invaded from the east. The 2 powers had agreed, in secret, to divide Europe between them, a pact that made neighbors into enemies overnight. Polish Jews, caught between 2 occupying forces, fled eastward into Lithuania, which was still technically independent. They came with whatever they could carry. Some came with almost nothing. By June 1940, the Soviets had occupied Lithuania. One by one, Western consulates began closing. The borders that had offered temporary safety were sealing shut. To the west, the Nazis. To the east, the Soviets. The only corridor still open was a route east across Siberia, through Japan, and onward to whatever country might accept a refugee. To take that route, you needed one thing: a Japanese transit visa. On the morning of July 18, 1940, Sugihara opened the shutters of the consulate and found a crowd at the gate. Not a small group. Hundreds of people. Families with children, elderly men and women, people who had been traveling for weeks and had arrived in the night and waited in the dark until morning. He went downstairs. He opened the gate. He listened. They needed transit visas. Most of them had no confirmed destination beyond Japan. Most did not have the financial documentation the consulate's standard protocol required. Under the rules Sugihara had followed for 20 years, he could not legally issue a single one. He went back inside. He sat down at his desk. He thought for a long time. Then he wrote a telegram to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Tokyo. He explained the situation clearly and formally. Hundreds of refugees, a single viable escape route, lives at risk, a request for special authorization to issue visas outside standard criteria. Tokyo replied, "Denied. Follow standard procedures." Sugihara looked out the window. The crowd was still there. He wrote a second telegram, more detailed, more urgent. He described what he had seen at the gate. He described what the people had told him was waiting for them if they stayed. Tokyo replied, "Denied." He wrote a third telegram, his last formal attempt. Tokyo replied, "Denied. Do not send further requests on this matter." Sugihara folded the 3 telegrams. He placed them on the desk. He looked at his wife Yukiko standing beside him. Then he opened his journal and wrote a sentence that would only be understood fully many years later. "I may have to disobey my government, But if I don't act, I will have to disobey my conscience for the rest of my life. He closed the journal. He picked up his pen. Here is what the opening of this story didn't tell you. Because when you picture Sugihara at that desk, you might picture a man working through an official program. Slow, bureaucratic, authorized. A consulate doing its job. That is not what this was. What Sugihara was doing had no precedent in the history of Japanese diplomacy. There was no government authorization. There was no legal framework. There was no safety net of any kind. Every single visa he signed was a direct violation of an explicit order from his own government, an order he had received 3 times in writing with increasing firmness. His career, his pension, his family's security, all of it was on the table with every page he wrote. He had not been given permission. He had asked 3 times and been told no 3 times. And outside his window the line kept growing. He started on the morning of July 18, 1940, and he did not stop. The routine was absolute. He woke before dawn. He sat at the desk. He wrote. Each visa required a full name, a date, a careful signature in his precise calligraphy, a sequential number. Yukiko stood beside him for hours, picking up each completed page, pressing the consular seal, setting it aside. Their children were in the house. They heard their father working long after they went to sleep at night, and when they woke in the morning, he was already at the desk again. A normal consul produced 20 to 30 visas in a month. Sugihara was writing 200 to 300 a day, 18 to 20 hours without stopping. He simplified the forms to write faster. He did not check final destinations. There was no point and no time. Each number in the sequence was a family. He did not think about the numbers. He wrote the next name. His hands began to hurt in the first week. He did not stop. One afternoon in August, he allowed himself 5 minutes away from the desk. He stood at the window. Yukiko brought tea. She looked out at the gate. "The line is longer than yesterday," she said. "I know," he said. She looked at his hands, swollen, ink that no longer fully washed away. "Your hands." He looked at them for a moment. "They're fine." He drank the tea. He went back to the desk. He picked up the pen. There was something Sugihara understood by August that made him write faster than ever. As a diplomat and as an intelligence officer, it was his job to know what was happening in the occupied territories. He had been sending reports to Tokyo for months, detailed reports based on reliable sources, massacres, deportations, systematic violence against Jewish communities in German-controlled territory. He had sent the information. Tokyo had replied about administrative procedures. Around that same time, he had occasion to speak frankly with a British diplomatic contact based in Kaunas. The British were aware of the situation at the consulate. They had resources. They had international standing. Sugihara asked him directly, could his government do anything for the people at the gate? The man looked at him for a long moment before answering. "Our hands are tied. There are political considerations that I'm not in a position to override." Sugihara thanked him. The man left. Sugihara stood alone in the room for a moment. Every government that might have acted had decided not to. The only thing in that room that was not tied, not bound by political considerations, not constrained by alliances or elections or strategic calculations, was the pen on the desk. He went back to it. In August, a telegram arrived from the Japanese embassy in Berlin. The tone was careful, a suggestion, not a direct order. The Germans had noticed that certain consulates were issuing visas to Jewish refugees. It would be advisable to exercise caution. Sugihara read it, folded it, put it in a drawer, wrote the next visa. Then came the afternoon of the Soviet inspection. 2 officials arrived for a routine administrative review of the consulate. Sugihara received them with the impeccable professional courtesy that had been his manner for 20 years. He showed them through the rooms. They came to his desk. On it, in neat stacks, were the visas waiting for Yukiko's seal. The officials looked at the stacks. One of them reached out and picked up 3 visas from the pile. He read them carefully. Names, dates, destinations. He looked at the next one, then the next. The room was completely silent. Sugihara did not move. Yukiko stood to the side, the seal still in her hand, waiting. The official looked up at Sugihara. He held the look for several seconds without speaking. Then he placed the 3 visas back on the pile, precisely where he had found them. "The Japanese are indeed meticulous," he said. He signed the inspection form. Both officials left. Sugihara waited until the door closed. He looked at Yukiko. She was still holding the seal. He picked up the pen. He wrote the next visa. In early September, the Soviet authorities ordered the Japanese consulate in Kaunas to close. Sugihara had days to evacuate. The crowd at the gate had not gotten smaller. He wrote faster. When the consulate officially closed, he moved to the Hotel Metropolis and kept writing from his room. People found out where he was. A line formed outside the hotel. He passed visas through the window of his room. He wrote until after midnight, slept for a few hours, and was back at the desk before dawn. On September 4, 1940, the Sugihara family arrived at Kaunas station with their luggage. Somehow people had learned the departure time. Hundreds of them were on the platform. Sugihara sat on a bench on the platform and kept writing. The train arrived. His family boarded. He continued writing from the window of the carriage, passing visas through the bars of the window to the hands reaching up from the platform below. Then the train began to move. People ran alongside the carriage. Sugihara kept writing, kept passing pages through the bars. The train gathered speed. The reaching hands fell behind. He looked at what he had left, a small stack of blank pages. He had run out of time to write more names. He picked up the pages. They had his signature. They had the consular seal. He threw them through the window onto the platform. Someone could write the names afterward. The signature and the seal were what mattered. The platform receded. The crowd became smaller. He heard someone call his name. He leaned out the window one last time. "Please forgive me," he called back. "I cannot write any more. I wish you the best." He bowed deeply from the window of the moving train. A voice from the platform fading. "Sugihara, we will never forget you." The train curved away. The station disappeared. He sat back down. He looked at his hands for a long time. He had asked for forgiveness, for not having written more. The war continued for 5 more years. Sugihara served at diplomatic posts across Eastern Europe. In 1945, after the German surrender, he was detained by Soviet forces in Bucharest. He spent 18 months in a prisoner of war camp. He was released in 1946 and returned to Japan with his family. In 1947, he received a summons from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He went to the ministry expecting to discuss his reintegration into the service. The war was over. His career was long and distinguished. He had served at postings across 2 continents and spoke 4 languages. He had done his job. The ministry had a different matter to address. In the summer of 1940, Chiune Sugihara had violated direct orders from the Japanese government. He had issued visas without authorization repeatedly, after receiving 3 explicit written refusals. He had continued after being warned by the embassy in Berlin. The fact that refugees had used those visas to leave Lithuania did not alter the question of procedure. Chiune Sugihara was dismissed from the Japanese diplomatic service. 28 years of career ended. No full pension, no formal recognition, no word of thanks. He had written in his journal, "I may have to disobey my government." He had disobeyed his government. The government had answered. Sugihara rebuilt a civilian life from the beginning. Without the network of the Foreign Service, without the prestige of a diplomatic title, he found work as a commercial representative for a trading company. He sold light bulbs. He traveled door to door. The man who had signed 6,000 visas in 29 days sold light bulbs while almost no one in Japan knew his name. Yukiko stayed. The children grew. He did not speak publicly about Kaunas. There was no movement to recognize what he had done, no committee, no commemoration. The story existed only in the memories of the people who had been at the gate, and he had no way of knowing whether any of them were still alive. In 1969, 29 years after he left that train platform, there was a knock at his door in Tokyo. A man stood there. His name was Joshua Nishri. He was an Israeli diplomat who had, as a young man in Lithuania in the summer of 1940, received a transit visa from the Japanese consulate in Kaunas. He had spent years trying to find out what had happened to the man who signed it. He had finally traced Sugihara to Tokyo. The door opened. Sugihara was 69 years old. Nishri looked at him. "Are you Chiune Sugihara, the consul in Kaunas?" Sugihara said that he was. Nishri embraced him in the doorway. He couldn't speak for a moment. "Do you have any idea how many of us are alive because of you?" Sugihara did not know. He had never known. He did not know whether the visas had worked, whether the families had made it through Japan, whether they had found places to go. He had written 6,000 visas and spent 29 years not knowing if a single one of them had served its purpose. In 1985, the State of Israel officially recognized Chiune Sugihara as righteous among the nations, the highest honor Israel grants to non-Jews who risked their lives to save Jewish people during the Holocaust. There was a ceremony in Jerusalem. Sugihara was 85 years old. Descendants of people he had saved traveled from across the world to be there. Some of them brought the original visas, yellowed pages, covered in the careful handwriting of a man sitting at a desk in Kaunas 45 years before. Sugihara held one of the pages. He looked at the handwriting. He recognized it immediately. The same hand, 45 years older. The numbers, by then, were clear. Approximately 6,000 visas, each covering a family, sometimes more. The descendants of the people who had passed through that gate, estimated today at 100,000 people scattered across the world, alive. They called themselves Sugihara survivors. On July 31, 1986, Chiune Sugihara died in Kamakura, Japan. He was 86 years old. It was exactly 46 years after the morning he had opened the shutters of the consulate in Kaunas and found a crowd at the gate. He wrote in his journal that summer, "I may have to disobey my government, but if I don't act, I will have to disobey my conscience for the rest of my life." He disobeyed his government. They dismissed him for it. He had known they would. He never disobeyed his conscience, not once, across 86 years. No record of regret exists. Not in his journals, not in his interviews, not in anything he said in the years after Nishri knocked on his door and the world finally began to understand what had happened in that quiet room in Lithuania in the summer of 1940. He asked Tokyo 3 times. 3 times they said no. He wrote anyway, 18 hours a day for 29 days, until his hands could barely hold the pen. As his train pulled away from the station, he threw blank pages signed with his name out the window, so strangers could write their own names on them. He was dismissed from the career he had given his life to. He spent years selling light bulbs, while almost no one knew his name. And when someone finally found him, 29 years later, and asked if he had any idea how many people were alive because of him, Chiune Sugihara, the man who had disobeyed his government 3 times, had no idea at all. This is the story of Chiune Sugihara, the diplomat who asked 3 times and was refused 3 times, who chose to disobey his government so he would never have to disobey his conscience, who was dismissed for it, who wrote until his hands gave out and threw visas from the window of a moving train, and who spent 3 decades not knowing if any of it had mattered. It had mattered for 100,000 lives. Chiune Sugihara, 1900 to 1986, the man who disobeyed 3 times and saved 100,000 lives.